Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer a few reflections on what I will call the pathology of greed. Pathology is a big academic word, I suppose. It just basically means it has some sort of destructive or negative or unhealthy effect. When we speak of something as pathological, we think of it as being something that is working against one's holistic health. Greed, it seems, is so common and so commonly referred to, and in many cases just commonly even expected. It seems peculiar to me that it is not often regarded or responded to as a pathology. You know, if we have an epidemic of a particular virus or bacteria, suddenly there is this major societal response to this medical emergency to eradicate that virus or bacteria or whatever, or disseminate vaccinations or whatever it is we need to do to stop that. But there are viruses or infections of the mind that are so common and in many ways far more destructive that remain completely unaddressed. And one of those, I would say, is the pathology of greed. Everywhere greed appears, somebody suffers loss, a relationship is unbalanced, a society or community is unbalanced, egalitarian or equal distribution of resources is sabotaged, inequities result, and when inequities result, then crime goes up because of people who are desperate to find some way to get their needs met. You know, if the societal system is not providing legitimate ways to get the needs met, then needs will demand to be met and people will find illegitimate means. But the needs will have to be met one way or another. So, on a similar note, it reminds me of that one scene in the movie Beaches where the young girl who's from a more working class family, I guess, is at this resort where there are a lot of wealthy people, and this wealthy woman walks by and hands her a large, a fairly relatively large denomination of a bill, a $20 bill, $50 bill, I'm not sure. And the young girl says, "What's this for?" And the wealthy woman says, "To keep you honest." And I thought, you know, that's a really good way of reasoning it. You know, that because she was investing in this young lady, providing her a way to legitimately get her needs met, she was discouraging any impulse in that young girl to resort to stealing or less legitimate means, you know, or devious ways of acquiring wealth. That it was being given to her specifically as a reward for being a person of good character. Does that mean that our demonstrations of good character should all have monetary rewards? Well, that might trivialize it a bit. I always get nervous when money becomes the measure of things. But there should be ways in which virtue, good character, kindness, generosity, and so forth are rewarded from earliest childhood on up, so that we don't just say that we believe in virtue, that we believe in generosity and kindness and inclusivity and so forth. We are actually demonstrating it with our lives. It's not something we mouth, not something we parrot or repeat. It's something we actually do every moment of our lives, every day of our lives. The pathology of greed, of course, works exactly against this. And yet people seem to think that satisfying greed equates to success in some sense of the word, that the person who has more must indeed be more successful, instead of feeling sorry for that person as someone who is obviously on the losing side of a struggle with greed. That person has more than he needs. Oh, how sad. That should be the response. Because for the person to have more than he needs, if he's not using it to help anyone, if it's sitting idle when it could be doing some good in the world, if it's locked in a bank because he is living in fear of what terrible thing might happen to him someday, forgetting that at some point all that money in the bank may become inaccessible. If the banking system fails or some sort of economic panic hits and the banks close, and the money may still be there, but you won't have access to it. You can't spend it. You can't buy your resources with anything else. At that point, that person would be left with nothing except for whatever relationships he may have formed with those around him. When everything else fails, we still have each other. We still have the person we meet on the street. We still have the person who lives next door. We still have the resources, the abilities, the insights, the wisdom of every other person around us, to the extent that we have nurtured those relationships, that we find ways of valuing those people and giving those people reason to value us. There may be situations in which we are not able, however, to give people a reason to value us. There may be, one of the phrases I came up with quite a number of years ago was that life is a collaborative effort. We all take turns being the one in need. The curious thing I found over time is how few people are willing to take their turn being the one in need. We all want to be the generous one, but if there isn't someone in need to whom or with whom to share resources, then there isn't really any way to express generosity. So sometimes we have to respect that others have a need to give, and we need to be willing to be the recipients of generosity. But it's this give and take, this back and forth, this circulation between us, just like the blood circulating through the human body. It's what keeps communities and society healthy. The give and take, the caring for each other, the being there, when someone is hurt, to be there and help them out until they're well, because that way, if you are ever hurt, which, virtually all injuries are unexpected, they happen from time to time, they happen to a lot of different people, virtually none of them are ever expected. In those moments, however, they need to have a community, a village of people around them who will take care of them and forgive the fact that they cannot make a contribution at this time. I met a woman with a particular disability who, at the onset of this degenerative disability, said that she basically laid in bed for 2 years because Suddenly the nerves and muscles weren't working like they always had. And she was able, after that, to recover a certain amount of movement and ability, but it is still a degenerative sort of condition. In those transitions, she may be faced, for example, with shifting from relying on her physical abilities to now relying on her mental abilities. I was told by a friend of mine who has been blind since birth that in some tribal societies, the blind people were because the tribe did not have a written language or a library, so to speak, that all of their history had to be carried in memory and was oral history. It was told from one person to another, to another, to another. Well, the blind people in the tribe would be the ones assigned to memorizing the entire history of the tribe. They were essentially the walking libraries, the records, the history of the tribe. Because they couldn't hunt, they couldn't do a lot of things because of their visual impairment, they still had their ears, they still had their mouths, they still had their minds. And they became the keepers of the history of the tribe, fulfilling a very valuable function because everyone else had other things that they had to be doing and couldn't spend all that time accurately memorizing the entire history of the tribe. So it's not about who matters and who doesn't, but figuring out, using our ingenuity, using our creativity, putting all of our heads together, so to speak, so that together we can create a solution that no single one of us would otherwise be able to create. What sabotages all this, of course, is if you have the pathology of greed entered in any case, in any form whatsoever. That if the community does not respond immediately en masse to this pathology of greed in the same way that we respond to an infection or an epidemic of measles or whatever, if it doesn't get that kind of attention to say that no, this is sick, this is wrong, this is unhealthy, and we need to address it, and we need to address it promptly while it's small before it gets big. Because if that pathological greed is allowed to sit there in the community and to begin to grow, and others begin to emulate it, suddenly there are people who are going without, whose needs are not being met, and when they petition the community for help, they're not given the help they need. And so they consequently have to resort to more and more desperate means. On a vaguely related subject, I was talking with someone once about terrorism, and commented to them that really the best insurance against terrorism is to turn the entire human race into a bunch of complacent middle-class citizens. Because then anyone looking for a recruit for their terrorist activity wouldn't be able to find a single volunteer. If nobody had any needs, if nobody was doing without, if there wasn't any injustice that hadn't been addressed, there would be no reason to resort to that kind of violence in order to be heard. To the extent that someone is greedy for power, or greedy for attention, or greedy for anything, though, greed has to do with imbalance, with wanting more than you need, with wanting more than is appropriate, with more than is healthy. Greed could be as simple as, the ice cream is delicious, I'm going to eat all of it. And by the time you get done eating it, you're positively sick. And you don't want to eat anything for another day because you're so full of all this sugar and cream and everything that is not the nutritious, balanced diet that the body needs. Sort of way. Greed is this kind of psychological, mental pathology where people think they want, think they must have whatever quantity it is, but it's more than what they need, and on some level they know it's more than what they need, but maybe they've bought the lie that having more than you need is success, instead of realizing that true success is in having the relationships so well developed around you that you really don't need anything at all. To the extent that our relationships are healthy and intact, and we know we can trust and rely upon each other, none of us really needs to own anything at all. To the extent that greed has reshaped American civilization, reshaped all of human civilization, by saying, I must have this because I can't trust you to make sure that I have enough. And so there we get into practices of property ownership. I think it's something that is necessary within our time. So I'm not saying we need to throw out property ownership overnight. But we may want to encourage humanity to evolve over time to a different kind of society where ownership simply becomes bothersome and no longer necessary, because everybody has all the house and yard and space and whatever they need, and without having to say, these are my boundaries, don't come within them. To the extent that someone else's greed has attempt to take something illicitly from me, however, it puts me and every other person in that position in the position of saying, these are my boundaries, you must respect my boundaries. And one of the ways our governments have set up laws and such are by recognizing what certain boundaries, and that if somebody encroaches upon those boundaries or crosses the boundaries and takes something that isn't legitimately theirs, then it becomes a crime and invites attention from the judicial system and so forth. The pathology of greed is somewhere behind all of that, to say that I need more power than I have. Do I or don't I? Well, maybe we need to talk about it first and figure out why I think I need that power, why I think I need that symbol of success. Is there something about that symbol of success that will get me approval from more people around me? And if so, I guess, why is that approval so important? And one thing kind of leads to another, like a row of dominoes. We're greedy for success because we want the approval, because the approval will give us the opportunity so that we could potentially live the life which we'd imagined or dreamed or wished for ourselves. Instead of just saying, if we all get together on this, and we all work together, and we make sure that everybody has enough, each of us could very well be spending most of our time pursuing our dreams. The person who has a fascination for languages may be learning 15 different languages fluently. The person who has a passion for music may be reaching new heights of music composition or piano performance or any number of other instruments. The end result is that humanity winds up far more beautiful than it's ever been. To the extent that greed has stuck its nose in, so to speak, we have become our own enemies. We have sabotaged our own ability to be the most beautiful and wonderful that we could be. The pathology of greed, and it is a pathology that needs to be addressed as such. It needs to be taken seriously. That when somebody is demonstrating greed, instead of saying, wow, he certainly has the most wonderful, lavish, expensive car, to instead say, wow, I feel so sorry for him that he actually feels the need to go after something that is totally impractical for him. And that possibly the reason he's going after that is because of the approval he seeks from his own community that his community will not otherwise give him. If the community is what says the more expensive car, the bigger, more wastefully designed house, the extravagant vacations taken with inappropriate frequency. If the community says that these are the definitions of success, that encourages, feeds, perhaps even seeds the pathology of greed in that person. In creating healthy communities, then, it is important for each one of us to speak up whenever we have opportunity about the standards and definitions that our communities embrace. what we as a people have decided is the definition of success. What we have decided as a people is the definition of what is appropriate. Should everyone have a 5,000 square foot house? Is that a reasonable goal? Is it necessary? Is it doable? If it's not doable, maybe we should come up with a more appropriate goal that is not quite so extravagant. Instead of talking about the haves and the have-nots, and thinking of the haves as the lucky ones and the have-nots as the unlucky ones, instead of recognizing that the haves may be more infected with greed and the have-nots may be less infected with greed. Though, as for that, I've seen both on both sides. I've seen have-nots, quote-unquote, people who don't have much, people who are struggling to survive, behaving every bit as greedily as some of the wealthiest people I've ever read about. And similarly, I've found people on both sides of the fence. Wealthy people who are living very content lives without needing to flaunt their wealth in any way. And poor people who are being very content with what they have also, even though they have very little. It's not a direct result of having or not having anything. It's an orientation of the mind, a slant of desire that is specifically unhealthy. That's why I keep calling it the pathology of greed. It's when you've gone beyond ambition to wanting something that if you got it would be profoundly unhealthy. When you want the ice cream so bad that you'll consume more of it than your body can possibly absorb. When the food tastes so delicious that you just never know when to stop eating. When the person you see in the mirror is not the picture of health, and the reason is not because of anything that happened to you, but because of your own choices that you've made. Does that mean you should be condemned and ridiculed and devalued and so forth? Absolutely not. It does, however, mean that you need to find a way, some way, to be more proactive, to begin to address whatever is challenging you, in the same way that society needs to notice, without giggling about it as if it was trivial, just how serious a threat of pathological greed is. And having recognized it, identified it, described how things should be, recognized how things are, and by collaborative consensus, figuring out how do we get from one to the other? How do we get from where we are to a place where everybody has enough, where crime becomes non-existent because nobody needs to resort to inappropriate means to get what they need, where the pathology of greed, the notion that I should have more than what I do, even though I don't have a reason, that sort of mental, emotional imbalance would be addressed effectively, rather than allowed to become an infection within the community that unbalances every relationship around. It is not just amusing, it is not just trivial. Greed is, and I'm probably not saying anything original by saying this, greed is very much at the heart of most societal problems. The fact that it is common, however, does not mean that it shouldn't be addressed. The fact that it is common doesn't mean it's unsolvable. All common means is that we've waited too long and we've done too little. We can begin today, however, to make a difference. Within our own lives, taking some time to ponder, how much is enough for me? And do I really need that? And is it really healthy for me? Because if it's not healthy for me, if it's more than I have the time and energy to manage, I am becoming my own enemy by embracing it. By allowing greed to run rampant within myself, I become the reason for my failure. Or at least a significant part of the reason. Ideally, there would be a village or a community around us that would hold up a mirror and help us see ourselves whenever those conditions develop. That would, someone who would sensitively, gently step forward and say, you used to be such a wonderfully grounded, centered and balanced person, but I've been noticing this or that characteristic in you lately, and I'm very concerned about what's going on. Is there something of which you're afraid? Is there some condition you haven't informed, about which you haven't informed your community? Some way that we need to support you that we're not? What is going on? To the extent that we embrace the truth, we move away from greed, because greed thrives on things that are absolutely not truthful. Greed depends upon a perception that is a lie, that I need more than I need, that I have to have this or I will die. And if we are open-minded enough and loving enough and wise enough, we find, if we ever experience that, the negative outcome we predicted for ourselves doesn't happen. The greed doesn't want us to see what the truth is. In embracing truth, we draw closer to the divine, we draw closer to the best parts of ourselves, to the best form of ourselves, to the best selves that we can be. Being your best requires you to resist the pathology of greed. Being the best you that the world could ever hope to see requires, instead of greed, embracing unconditional love. Thank you very much for watching. I hope my comments this last half hour have been helpful to you.